Welcome to The State of Us. Real people with honest opinions and the future of responsible media. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Is the placebo effect real, or is it a trick? Well, that's what we're talking about. The New York Times Magazine did a feature piece on November 7th, 2018 on the very subject, and it wouldn't do it justice for me to try to sum it up for you in a minute or two. So on this one, I am going to tell you should Google it. It's entitled, "What If the Placebo Effect Isn't a Trick?" So Google that, New York Times Magazine, and go ahead and read up on it if it's of interest to you. For today's podcast, we're going to kind of be opening the conversation up because this brought to light a lot of interesting ideas about where we are as a society, and it seems very apt right now with the current political climate and, what are facts and are they just whatever you make them out to be? So really, is the placebo effect a trick or is it real is kind of just more of a backdrop for us today. But of course, any philosophical conversation couldn't begin or be complete without the philosopher himself.
Your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Yep, here we are, folks, going to do some philosophical stuff. If that tree falls in the forest, nobody's there, does it make a sound? Is the glass half empty or half full? Let's just start with,
we're not going to debate it, okay? But let's
he's killing me with information today, folks. I'm just letting you know.
Right before the show, too.
Yeah.
We have to try different things out for Lance because it's hard to, if you give him too
I'm very interested in stuff he's handed me, so hopefully I can come up with some definitive, maybe answers for you.
Oh, well, that would be the antithesis of philosophy. You would be doing a great disservice if you came up with any definitive answer.
I said some definitive maybes.
Okay. So let's start with the basic question to just, lay out the ground with what kind of people our listeners are starting with. I mean, it's your fault because you posed the question. If a tree falls in a forest and there's no one or anything around to hear it, did it make a noise?
Me?
Yes.
No.
It didn't?
No.
Well, great. We're starting in the same spot. Dang it.
Oh.
Okay, no, it's okay. I'm not that surprised that we're starting from the same. So those of you out there who are like, you guys are nuts. Science tells us it makes a noise. Okay. Well, that's all the more reason to take to the comment section
today. That's because
today.
science was there.
I said we're not going to discuss that one. You can discuss it in the comments, though. And if you really want, we'll do a separate show on the tree.
Was that
question.
really one of the questions?
What do you mean?
I mean, am I guessing the nature of the show just because?
I thought, well, a question like that.
Is that really why you were going to start out?
I mean, there's a great number.
I got it there?
There's a great number. Yeah.
I mean, there's no script here, folks.
No.
That's my ESPN working.
Wow. Little stick and digs at ESPN, apparently.
No, my ESPN.
Okay.
See, you call ESP. I've always called ESPN. So, well, not always. Okay. Since 1979 when they started.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so this article that I handed Lance, tell me, what's your major takeaway for it?
Which article? I've got 14 pieces of paper here.
The placebo effect from the New York Times.
I think it's really, really strong. I mean, basically,
nice history.
A couple of the major things, yes, and very long and very intense and very medical, scientific oriented, which is not my forte. Yeah. But I love the concept and the idea. And basically it's taking that the healing non-traditional medicines, there really are some things in there that they're finding out do work with the human brain. And what I found very interesting was there are a couple of people here who really weren't doctors, but they've discovered something that there's an enzyme in the body that responds to pain and painkillers. And it talks about how they can get a little bit of it from a genome, RS46A. All this means nothing to me, but they can kind of then find out whether you have, it predicts how much of this enzyme you have. And then through their studies, they can find out whether how well you respond to personal attention and placebos. The fact is, some of us don't, in their study, what they found out is that some of us don't want people to make over us. And if people make over us, it actually makes us sicker. Whereas some of us, and so all we want is just medicine. Don't, pat my back and rub my belly and give me acupuncture and do all these things to me and care for me and tell me how life is going to be good. Just give me a daggone pill and I react better. But there are those of us, based on how much of this enzyme that we have, respond to that personal attention and then don't need, quote, the hardcore medicine, that our own brain begins to stimulate a healthy response and take care of whatever pain, soreness, stiffness, illness that we have. So both the medicine and the drug work. They can look at the brain and see the brain patterns being stimulated either by the medicine or by the more holistic care, and the patients both improve. But it's based on how much of this enzyme you have in your body. And then so it concludes with, should doctors be doing this and then knowing how to treat each patient? Should they walk in the room and say, okay, here's what you have, here's the medicine you need to take?
Is it that black and white?
Or is it, well, yeah, but that's what they're, and they've got some scientific studies that I don't truly understand to back up that theory. And they're saying, that may be a Pandora's box that it opens up. But I can, in my own life and in the life of my children and my parents that I have dealt with who are ill, I can see this. I mean, it makes sense to me as to their personalities, as to what worked for them.
Yeah.
And what works for me.
I think a nice way, at least for me, of summing it up was this one sentence here where it's talking about the placebo effect, and it says the placebo effect, is included in clinical trials because it is recognized as an important part of every treatment, but it is treated as if it were not important in itself. And without going into the long back history, basically the thinking here is that in the 1950s, the rise of the double-blind, placebo-controlled medical test began. And in 1962, the Food and Drug Administration began to require that pharmaceutical companies prove their new drugs were effective before they gave them to the public. And so the way that they require that now, basically every new drug has to outperform placebos on 2 independent studies in order to gain FDA approval. So the standard of whether or not a drug, right, can be given to the public at the most basic level, because I don't want to undermine the very advanced work that the FDA does do. It's not this simple, but on a very high level, it's, does this drug improve, whatever it's attempting to improve, more than a placebo in a double-blind controlled group? In other words, that means both the doctors and the participants, the patients, don't know which they're getting, and the doctors don't know which are being given. So the idea here being that both the patients and the doctors have no way of knowing. They can't come in with any preconception of whether or not they're getting the real thing. And the fascinating thing that the article points out is this whole, that's the standard we use, and yet we've spent almost no time studying the placebo effect. In other words, we're measuring it off of the cost benefit between, the difference between what the drug does and what the placebo effect does without first establishing how much of it is the placebo effect. In other words, even when you get a drug that works, how much of it working is placebo-based versus the actual drug doing something. Mm-hmm. And I think it's fair to say part of what the article is pointing out here is these scientists of all backgrounds, and some who aren't scientists at all, have gathered to begin to conclude at least that some portion of any time a medicine works for you is at least in part due to the placebo effect. How much and why, we don't fully understand yet. but that's starting to be kind of the school of thought we're going with here is we have to study and measure not just that difference, but the initial placebo effect. Because the way that we look at it now, right, is it outperforms the placebo. Therefore, the drug did all of that. And the changing here that they're looking at is, well, let's not assume that the drug's all to thank. I mean, obviously they did better.
Right.
So the drug's to thank to some extent. But to what extent did the placebo effect also benefit those on the real thing? You know, believing that they were getting the treatment and thereby feeling better, both because of the treatment and because of their belief in the treatment or in the people giving them the treatment.
And that's where what I was talking about, that kind of does a good job of, then they took that a step further and said, okay, based on this enzyme that's in our bodies, how do those people respond? And that, you know, people with the high COMT variant had the weakest placebo responses, and those with, you know, with low obviously had the strongest. But then it also took into account the interaction, meaning how much do you believe in your doctor? How much do you believe in your nurse, you know, practitioner, whoever it is that you see, or your surgeon? And again, it said basically off of this enzyme level, which I just find fascinating. It talked about how much interaction you should have. And I know as someone who despises going to the doctor, that it has taken me years to find a person that I trust. And now I am outside of the typical healthcare field, and I pay a monthly fee to have access to this doctor who does not take insurance. And I followed him. He got out of practice because he was so frustrated with only getting to spend 2 minutes with each patient and spending most of his time hiring people to file paperwork and negotiating what he'd get paid. He went off the grid and said, okay, I want X number of patients. You all pay me X amount of money per month, and you have me within 24 hours, and you get a minimum of a half an hour with me. Mm-hmm. And he even makes house calls. And what I have to pay for a doctor visit is the same amount as my copay through my insurance. So like when I have to go to a doctor, you know, to a specialist or something, I pay the, you know, my copay, and I get 5 minutes with the doctor. I pay the same amount to this person, to my personal care physician, and he sits there and we have a conversation for half an hour. And so he knows me. He knows how I think. He knows what I like, what I don't like. He knows the issues that I want to discuss. Plus he knows what I need to discuss, but we have a personal relationship. So I'm much more likely to open up to him to where he can treat me then as a whole person.
Yeah.
Instead of, because I truly think, even if he doesn't know who I am, I truly believe he cares about me as an individual. Even if you were to call him up today and say, well, who's this? And he goes, I don't know who you're talking about. I believe when I go see him that he truly cares about me as an individual. So therefore, I'm more likely to do what he says. I feel better after I've been there, even though I'm going not feeling well.
Right.
Yeah, all of those things.
Yep. Well, and it's amazing too, because I think it opens the door to,
which runs right into what this is saying, you know,
the holistic care, not just if we lie to you and tell you something is, because that's, I think, what comes to mind for a lot of people, right, is the placebo effect as well. If we basically tell you you're getting something that works that we don't have any real reason to believe will work, you get better. You know, the innocence is bliss kind of thing, which there's worth examining on its own, but there's also something to be said for, like you're pointing out, the larger conversation of when, particularly in medicine, holistic care is approached, patients are more likely to do what the doctor believes is necessary based on science, you know, most of the time, if they trust that the doctor cares about them. If you feel like a number, then it's going to be, well, my life doesn't matter to you. You know, you're just trying to get rid of me and you're looking for the quick fix. And if it's, I'm a name and a face and we have a relationship, then we thereby believe that you're not just giving me another diagnosis. You're giving me something that you believe is the right answer.
You're just a pill pusher. You're just, versus somebody who truly cares about me as a human being.
Mm-hmm. So, and with that, I think that's where, for me, it opened the conversation into philosophy as it relates in a practical way to today's world. And when we talk about, because there's been a lot of talk. I mean, ever since 2015, when the presidential campaigns were getting underway, all through now, the State of Us, on many occasions, formerly the Current Issues show, has asked of myself, of Lance, of formerly Camden, many different questions about, is a fact a fact? Is there a definitive truth? And I think we've all been guilty of saying, and guilty not in a bad way, just we've all done it, where for the purpose of conversation, to function in this society and as a political show based on talking about politics, we have to make some assumptions and go forward all from the same assumptions to arrive at any kind of solution. In other words, if I start with, there is absolutely objective truth. There are things that are facts always and forever, and they don't change. They are the way things are. And Lance comes at it and is, facts are only relative based on your perspective of those facts. In other words, I can make my own facts. We're probably not going to be able to arrive at much of a definitive solution on the media's role in reporting facts, So my point in that is, for most of what we've covered, we always go in making the assumption that there are things that are definitively true and definitively false, and then we can operate in a space of talking about the media's failure to report on things, or when the media does a good job. We can do that because we start from this same contractual agreement for conversation, not literal contract, but we've agreed that we're starting with these fundamental, principles. So today, that's why I wanted to take the opportunity for the back half of this show, is not only to tell you that there's some encouraging stuff where medicine is learning more about the power of the mind and how, if we properly activate it, because it does control all biological functions of the body, that it very well may be possible to use more of the brain's power to pull the levers in the body necessary to make you better sooner. That's basically the synopsis of this placebo effect thing, is that we're learning that it really isn't just the mind's power over matter. It has more to do with the mind's power to affect the matter, to tell the matter how to behave. And remembering that the mind is actually an organ with chemical processes. I mean, it is literally matter in and of itself. So that's, I guess, the synopsis there for the placebo effect part of this, is just that thinking and thought line of there's definitely something here, and it's encouraging to see that the medical community is starting to really pursue learning more about it. I think it'll be fascinating to see what have they learned in 10 years, about the real chemical changes that take place as a result of the quote unquote placebo effect. So with that, Lance, before we go on and talk a little bit about our philosophical stuff, for those of you that we hope continue to listen because you care about what Lance and I think, what are we doing here at TrueChat? What's the goal?
I don't know. You know what we didn't do? We didn't tell them why people should care about this.
Oh, yeah. Well, you want to do that first?
I think they care because it's cool.
I think so too.
You have to understand.
That's when I gave it to you.
We have to understand how people think, but also that the fascination of what something I really don't have a good grasp of is the power of the human mind. That the brain can do mighty things. And I just don't think we do a poor job as human beings unlocking the power of our brain. And too many times we meet roadblocks and we just give up. And if we would just stop and use our brain and know how to train our brain and to allow our brain to do some work, we would find a lot less roadblocks in life. So I think it's just very interesting when you talk about any kind of power of the brain and especially in the field of medicine is just, there's something to that holistic approach, no matter where it is, whether it's Asian or American Indian or wherever you go, the Buddhist, it's these people had some successes, long before we came up with pills and everything else. Not to poo-poo that stuff. Yeah. But so anyway, I think that's why you should care, because there are other ways that are possible to heal yourself. Now, sometimes you need a pill. Sometimes you need penicillin. You've got that, this is the only way you're going to get rid of it. I'm not saying you just pray your way to health or chant your way to health or whatever. Yeah. But there are some other things out there. But I think that's why you should care, is because we need to unlock the power of our brain, and maybe we can accomplish more as a society. But our mission here at TrueChat is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. So you always want me to prove my point. So I'm proving. But we're just trying to provide honest, open, and respectful conversations.
And notice
so that we can educate you.
Yeah, exactly. The path to education, especially from these 4 primary schools of philosophical thought that we'll be briefly discussing, is the idea that they were arrived at by thinking, by exercising the mind's ability to arrive at conclusions. How we get to those, of course, is there's the subject of debate, because how we get to them determines what we get to. As far as the why you care, I guess the fascinating thing for me to keep in mind for people as we move forward is always remembering that at least today, our brain does so much more subconsciously than we do consciously. And I'm not talking about strange mythical powers. I mean, hey, maybe those exist. I've heard many compelling theories before about how they do, but that's not what I'm talking about for the sake of this. I'm talking about, we don't give much credit to our brain thinking about it's keeping us breathing. Now we can consciously hold our breath, but we don't have to think, okay, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe. It does that. It keeps the heart beating. When you make hand motions, most of the time you're not thinking about it. You're not thinking about your inflections and your facial expressions and all of that. Those are subconscious processes taking place as a result of what you're consciously doing. So keeping that in mind we think sometimes that we get caught up in the difficulties of our conscious world, but your brain's doing more than that on the subconscious level. It's such an impressive organism in and of itself, and just its ability to handle so many things that are essential to, that make it possible for Lance and I to even have this conversation, this open, honest, and respectful conversation. So, Lance, for this, for our listeners' purposes, the information here is widely available in many places. So we're not citing a specific source, because if you Google schools of philosophical thought, you'll get a billion, freaking results on the internet. A billion? Oh my goodness. I don't know if it's that many. I don't quote me on that. So with our
$1 billion with our Austin Powers impersonation there.
Yeah. With our 10 minutes left, idealism, realism, and what else? Pragmatism and existentialism. So, Lance, let's start with our predictions. So you predict for me which one. Oh, man,
I'm not good at predictions.
And I'll predict for you.
That's why I don't gamble. I'm not good at predictions.
Well, hey, you were right about the midterms.
I know.
I know. I don't like it. I wish I hadn't been. Gosh darn it. You need some more time?
No, but see, if I'm wrong, I don't want you to be mad at me.
I won't be mad. No, this is honest, open, and respectful. I know you're not going into it with the intent of upsetting me.
Well, from my definition, I don't think you're this, but when I read about problem solving and teaching methods for it, I think you're kind of a pragmatist, is what I would say. Mm-hmm. Experientialism, that you're, you focus on hands-on problem solving, working in groups, bringing different disciplines of study together, and trying to use real life situations to ask questions and find answers. So that's what I think you are, and why is that part of the pragmatist, I think, fits you better than anything else that you handed me. So I don't know if I'm right or not, but I just gave you my what I thought you were and why from what in there makes me think of you.
I like the way that you explained why, because that was not, in all fairness, either of the two that I was going to say I lean toward. But I think there's truth to, there's two different things, right? What we believe and how we operate. At least Lance and I are using that as our contract for today's discussion, because I do think they're different. I think, as you read further down into hands-on problem solving, experimenting, projects often having students work in groups or people work in groups, bringing different disciplines together to solve real-world issues. I think that's the practical side of my beliefs.
That sounds like you. That sounds like our business meetings and our show meetings, mission statement, rough drafts of mission statements, so that's because that's why I went there.
Lance and I are going to talk about how we really, none of us fit into, one of these typically perfectly. We bleed in different areas. I would say that the pragmatism, also known as experimentalism, can't say that very fast.
Experientialism.
Meaning that makes more sense.
You're going to experience things. Yeah. You want to experience things.
Is very real to, if I lived off of the two things that I think I typically fit under, if I had to choose, just so you know, I'd say,
where are you? So
the belief system.
Since I didn't choose either one of the two you thought you were.
The belief system is probably idealism and some mix of idealism and existentialism, which is kind of funny because in some ways they are contrary to one another. So for those of you, just a brief, as we're defining idealism, is a philosophical approach that has its central tenet that ideas are the only true reality, the only thing worth knowing. Followed by existentialism. The nature of reality for existentialists is subjective and lies within the individual. The physical world has no inherent meaning outside of human existence.
Now, so you're reading from the definitions.
Yes.
And me being the educator, I went to how each of the four of these relate to education.
Yes.
Because that's where my comfort zone is, I guess. Mm-hmm. So I didn't really pay much attention to the definitions of each one. I went to the part where it talked about how it would affect education.
Yeah. So you have, as far as philosophers go, for those of you thinking of Plato or Aristotle, Plato being the father of idealism, Aristotle being the father of realism, as some of the better known too. So, and obviously both of them having kind of funny that the student almost went in the opposite direction of the teacher. So fascinating stuff. But my point there in those two is I do think that a lot of everything we do is very subjective. But this is where the pragmatism part comes in that you identified. I know that, and I don't want this to any way come off in prudish. I don't at all mean it that way. It's not high and mighty, my intellect is great kind of thing. That's not how I mean it. My point is that I don't think as a society, there's so many problems we face that dealing with the questions of what is real is not a practical thing for me in the world that I live in, the time that we are existing in, to focus my efforts on. I could do that my whole life and spend it in academia discussing it, but how much good I feel that does for humanity is negligible. I think it's important, but I think I have talents that I can better use those talents to put them to work in a practical way, which is where the pragmatism comes in of what's happening in the world right now and what can we do about it. It's great to sit around and think this to death, but at some point the thinking has to arrive at something for it to be valuable. And that's where some philosophical people out there may not like me. Because that's at some point the thought experiment ends because we have to do something with it, or it's just a fun, side excursion thing. So that's, I don't know if that made sense, but that's my,
no, I see you're taking it to the realist.
The pragmatist is the execution of.
There has to be some end game that is quantifiable.
Because I can't answer those questions alone, and I don't think we're at a point in our existence, our evolution, where we can answer those questions. I just don't think the answers are here yet, but I believe they exist, which is back to the Plato school of thought, is that it's worth searching for them and that they are discoverable, but there's only so much we can do that's within our own control to discover them. To an extent, it just takes time. We have to keep evolving and living and learning as a society to arrive at those answers. Because every great thinker is the product of the observation and environment in which they are, thinking about what other people have said to arrive at new conclusions. So we're all the work of others was where I come in. As far as for Lance goes, it's tough because I'd rather do that. Let's take a couple of these and put them together.
You can back it up. It's all right.
Yeah.
I don't even know what I am.
I know. So I think there's gotta be, I'm not going with, I don't think idealism. I'm not going to start there. I think there's some tenets of idealism. But that's not probably where I'd start, despite the fact that I know you scored as being a disciple of Plato. So despite that, I maybe that's, again, for you, that might be more of the belief, but back to the execution, I think you're probably falling in the realism or pragmatism area would be because as much as we can engage in these existential and idealistic conversations, I think I like the working in group things, again, cultivating that as an educator, for me, the discussion.
You don't know me very well then. I hate working in groups.
Well, you don't like it, but you like to facilitate your classroom was based on a group discussion.
Okay, then that is, I'm going to defend myself here.
Okay.
That's idealism.
Oh, so we are back to idealism.
Teaching methods focus on handling ideas through lecture, discussion, and Socratic dialogue, a method of teaching that uses questioning to help students discover and clarify knowledge.
See, I didn't read that far.
Introspection, intuition, insight, okay? Insight and whole-to-part logic are used to bring consciousness to the forms or concepts which are latent in the mind.
It makes sense because...
See, I think that describes, I would hope, that describes my classroom teaching style.
I think it does. I truly didn't read that part.
Maybe I didn't do that, but that's what I was trying to accomplish.
Constant
in
questions.
The classroom.
The continuation of, regardless of what you said, even if I agree with it, let's keep questioning and exploring that.
Now, and here, now let me read this other part, okay? Real answers and see if you think this fits my classroom, because I thought it did. Real answers come from within the individual, not from outside authority. Examining life through authentic thinking involves students in genuine learning experiences. Existentialists are opposed to thinking about students as objects to be measured, tracked, or standardized. Such educators want the educational experience to focus on creating opportunities for self-direction and self-actualization. They start with the student rather than on curriculum content. So
I think the whole thing here is showing the difference of the lens matters a lot.
What do you think about that?
From the way you presented how you were viewing mine, I thought it was very valid, but we're both approaching it. And that goes back to my initial point of we didn't agree on how we would approach this.
Right.
So we yielded very different answers, just like Lance chose pragmatism for me. And I didn't choose either of those. And I chose either realism or pragmatism, and he chose the other two.
Right.
So it's that whole
What does that say?
How are we? Yeah. How are we going about looking at? Either we don't know each other well at all, or we know each other better than we know ourselves. And there's something to be said for both.
But back
I suppose.
just quickly, because I just want your opinion. Do you think that existentialist? I didn't want to say existentialist. I should have said this school of thought. But do you think that describes what me in the discussions we've had about education?
I think, yeah. I mean, having been, again, for people that don't know, having been in Lance's class, there were many other students who had him for more years than I did. I think it was only in one year.
class.
Yeah. One time. And that's honestly because I spent a lot of time in the psychology realm. And that was the way I was going with my education, was the science of the mind. It wasn't
Plus, you didn't like my class, but that's okay.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, it is kind of odd because really I don't feel that I was one of, if Lance was going to list off his top 50 students of all time, in the classroom, because see, there's that weird difference, right? It's, I don't think I should make that list, because I don't think I was I think I was fine. I think I ended up with like an A- or something, but I was not a, model student in terms of really engaged with what was happening in the class.
There was one where you could sit through and get to the stuff that really interested you.
Yes. And that was because I was, and maybe that just had to do with, like, I remember in 8th grade, really the history stuff was super fascinating. And then it kind of faded away from that. And I was more interested in the history of how the mind has developed and our thoughts about it. And college was the final merger of understanding how I appreciate history in its context to the questions and the ongoing development of where we are mentally. And I don't mean from a scientific perspective. I mean from a thought perspective. I didn't realize that psychology really wasn't I love psychology. I think it's fascinating stuff, but I care a lot more about discussing philosophy than I do psychology. And they blur lines a lot because we get into a lot of ethical questions in psychology, especially with what we don't know. But yeah, no, I think that's, it makes sense as you're just, explaining it. In my defense, the realism and pragmatism points, I think, went back to the extent that the discussion stayed based in what we know about the world now. At least from what I recall, not a lot of conversations veering into the hypothetical realms of, it's one thing to say the hypothetical situation of, if you're back in history, how would you have handled this? It's another thing to say, well, if this never happened at all in history and we go on this alternate timeline and we arrive at, why, that's to me where the more, again, fitting within the frame of making it useful somehow, in other words, not existentialism or idealism for the sake of existentialism or idealism as a means to some sort of end, which in your case being, mine being solve problems, yours being people arriving at their own happiness through realizing whatever they're good at.
Right.
And hopefully helping them become better at whatever that thing is.
Fair enough.
So again, both, I think you could say executionally through a pragmatic lens of it has to achieve an end, we're not going to probably sit like Plato and spend our days completely engrossed in thought. You're going to go coach later today because that's an executional way that you fulfill this, fulfill your beliefs. Just like I host this show because it's an executional way that I can fulfill that mix of, it is fascinating. So you said pragmatism, and then I identified idealism and existentialism, and so did you as the, and then I went back and said some mix of realism and pragmatism. So we both about the other assumed, but we both self-identified the same categories. Fascinating. Okay. So
Too much time together.
Yeah, we'll leave you to think about all of that. By the way, coming weeks, we're hoping to have a few guests on. So Monday, the John Umstead is going to be on, author of Business is Art and host of the podcast Business is Art, business consultant extraordinaire. Hopefully going to bring us a practical conservative perspective And so it'll be nice to see kind of what we talk about. That's a surprise. And how it elevates with 3 people, where it goes. And then week of Thanksgiving, we've got our food special that Lance and I are doing, but we may have a special reappearance from Taylor Armstrong, a former intern at TrueChat, and now the host of the Armstrong Angle, the radio show. So he might be coming on, again, a conservative voice to bring in. So yeah, we've got some conservative stuff coming up. So if you're one of those that's hung in there like, guys, you said you'd bring back a conservative, but you're just beating me to death with your liberalness, can we bring some of that in? Yeah, we can. We're working on it. So we haven't decided who the new permanent person is, but we're testing the waters, so to speak. Don't tell them. They don't know that they're auditioning. So anything else? Anything else, Lance?
No.
Okay.
You're already over your time limit.
I know.
No, I don't have much.
No? Okay. Lost in thought.
Well, I am. This stuff always makes me do that.
Yeah. And that's why I can only spend so much time thinking about it.
I'm constantly evaluating and reevaluating
mm-hmm.
what I do, what I say, its impact, what's the best way to approach a situation to get the point across that I think is important for the student to take.
And then balancing that with at some point I just have to choose something which I probably won't love, because if I just sit here, keep thinking about it, I'll never do anything. That's been me with my YouTube videos, truthfully, is I've had a heck of a time with that. I can nitpick them to no end, and never get them out or not try new things because I'm concerned about X, Y, or Z. And so I've really been pushing the past 2 weeks to I have this list of things that have been building up to just do them, know? And if I think they suck, it doesn't matter. I'm going to put them out there and see,
Because people may think they do.
Yep.
And some people say, no, that was really good. We enjoyed that.
So, and people sometimes watch things that they think are really bad. So,
Quit being, you can be famous for being bad.
That's right. And that's why
are you
everybody
worried about perfectionism?
That's what everybody listens to our show for.
Yeah, let it go.
They just listen because we're nuts.
I would not have said you're a perfectionist.
Okay.
You jump from idea to idea so much.
Yes. Yep. I know it's difficult to
maybe
believe.
That is
you
the
should ask Brett if he thinks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where it stems from.
Maybe I need to have a discussion with him.
I want to find the answer, yet I'm constantly concerned that whatever I do find is not the right answer. So,
because you strive to do your best, but you go from thing to thing, so you never spend time on one thing to actually perfect it.
Uh-huh. TrueChat might be the only thing. And it's changed so much.
But even with TrueChat, we go.
The only constant is the name.
Somebody was asking me,
that's not even bad.
The history. And I said, well, we went from once a week for an hour.
Uh-huh.
Then we did 3 half-hour shows and for a week, but it was an hour and a half.
Yeah.
But we did 3 different half hours within the hour and a half.
Yep.
And I said, then we went to a 3-day-a-week thing. Then we went to every day for a half an hour. Then we switched from the Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday to a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 3-day-a-week thing.
Yep.
And they're like, I'm like, hey, that's my boss. We just have shows whenever he says. You've never stuck with one, so it's fine. I find it interesting that you're that perfectionist because I can see where you have the qualities, but at the same time, sometimes you get dissatisfied with how far you've taken something, and then you're like, or bored, and you go, okay, I got to go something else. And it's like, well, dude, you really haven't spent enough time here to perfect this, So
probably a lot of it's in the pursuit too of realizing how much it takes to perfect whatever the thing is, and deciding again that cost benefit of. I don't think perfectionism for the sake of, be perfect at something because it's good to be perfect at something. What does that perfection yield? If you're perfect at keeping things clean, does it yield something? Or is it just, is it an obsession or is it a practical perfection?
Gotcha.
aside from the whole thing of.
Other than that, folks, you ought to watch him on YouTube because he is perfectly attired and every hair is in place.
Yeah.
I mean, he is wasting some of his talents. He is wasting some of his talents on radio because he is GQ and all the way. It looks good. Me, on the other hand, I dress for radio.
Yes. No, well, hey, you started out coming in the classroom, right? When people could see you. So there's a different thought thing of when people could see him, he has the GQ going, but then it's just Justin. So going to practice,
I'm being practical. I'm dressing for practice and this gets by on the podcast.
Yep.
Cause you can listen to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher or anywhere that there are fine podcasts are listened to.
He did it. We got the mission. Nope, he didn't get the mission perfect. Shoot, I thought we were going to have it. You had the misspeak on the.
What do you want out of me? See,
instead of providing it with perfection,
dude, just roll with it. Life is good.
You got the end perfect.
They know.
That was good.
They know. The listeners know.
Okay.
And if they're first time listeners, thank you very much. And this is the way the show usually goes. So if you like it, listen to it. I don't always get everything right. But I have fun.
Yeah, that's in the pursuit of trying to figure out something about something.
When I find out that my boss is really uptight about me not getting it right, then I focus and get it right so he'll feel good. But it really doesn't do me any good because then he just picks up something else and he can complain about it.
It just changes again.
Yeah, it just changes.
By the time he gets it, it's different, and then we got to start over. It's been the struggle ever since we started this. I know.
I mean, but I had to learn a 4-paragraph mission statement, and then he changes it to, less than 20 words. It's like, dude, why don't we just start out with that? And then this other thing, it really made a difference because if you're listening to us, you already figured out how to listen to us. So I really don't understand why we're telling you where you can listen to us because you've already figured out how to listen to us.
Well, maybe they want to listen someplace else.
Oh, I see. So, it really doesn't make sense to me. So I drove him crazy because I would never say it correctly.
Yeah.
But I've spent the last 3 weeks trying to get it straight for him so that he'll quit just grabbing his head and shaking his head like, oh my God, what's he going to say now? So I just showed him
I think it's everybody's favorite part of the show.
Yeah.
Is the eternal struggle of Lance, kind of trying to memorize it. And then
it wasn't a struggle because I don't understand. If they're listening to us, they've already know how to find us. Right?
But say they're listening on the website. See, we're letting them know you can listen to us on, on the go because you can use one of these other options. So they found us for the first
people
time.
Would listen to us while they're driving?
Yes.
I feel like I might be responsible for some accidents.
Out of anger or confusion or both.
Either one.
I'm angry and I don't know what's going on. Darn it.
I'm mad as hell and I can't take it anymore.
That's right. Don't you love that when you get mad about something? It's like, I don't even know why I'm mad. I'm just mad.
Hitting your dashboard. Don't throw your phone. Okay, well, that makes sense. You answered you answered that age-old dilemma for me.
Yeah.
Why do we tell them how to listen to us if they're listening to us?
Well, it used to be easier with FM, right? There's just
because they could listen to us
AM, FM, yeah,
on something else.
Because there's other ways.
In a different way.
Okay, so for the state of us on TrueChat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
Enjoy your weekend, folks. I'm Lance Jackson.
Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time on The State of Us. Be the change.